Hello, and thank you for joining this episode of Breaking Down the Networking Chains. This episode is going to focus on firewalls. I'm Dwayne Natwick. I'm an author, trainer, and Microsoft certified trainer and regional lead with multiple Azure role-based certifications. And you can follow me on the social media links provided on this slide. So as we've talked about in the previous episodes, we have discussed VNets and network security groups, which are foundational components and networking services within the Azure environment that help you start to build your network architecture. As we start to go into more public-facing environments and hybrid environments, now we need to start talking about the higher level networking components, and one of those is firewalls. And again, for review, we're building our security posture around our network environment with perimeter security and network security. We talked a little bit about our network, the network security around isolation with VNets. We talked about creating access control rules with NSG, which also provide that network security component. Firewall fits more into this perimeter security standpoint, where we're now we have a service in place to do deep packet inspection and looking at information and data that as it comes in to our environment, and putting access rules in place to direct that traffic, and as well as block that traffic if necessary for potential malicious use of that information. We're going to talk about two areas that firewalls can be used within the Azure environment. The first and easiest to deploy, obviously, is an Azure Firewall. And Azure Firewall, the great thing about it is it has built-in high availability, unrestricted scalability. You can create an availability zone configuration for the firewalls to make it very resilient within your environment. It provides then those next generation packet filtering rules and network traffic filtering rules to protect your environment and make sure that malicious information isn't coming into your environment that might cause damage or gain access to sensitive resources. It also has then built in the threat intelligence based on Microsoft's threat database that can look for information coming in from potential dangerous IP addresses. And then you can also utilize multiple public IP addresses can be directed to that firewall as well, and utilize and filter those packets and direct those and translate those into different resource levels and VNets within your environment. If you have a corporate requirement, a corporate standard for specific firewalls within your environment, such as Palo Alto or Fortinet or SonicWall, Barracuda, and you have those already within your environment that you want to maintain because your IT support staff is familiar with supporting those resources and managing those types of firewalls. Microsoft also allows in the Azure environment the ability to stand up third-party firewall appliances. If the firewall has a software-based ability to go on to a virtual instance, then you have that ability. And I've listed a few on this slide that you can actually stand up directly from the Azure Marketplace, and we'll take a look at that in the demo as well. So let's jump into the Azure portal right now and look at Azure Firewalls. Here we're in the Azure dashboard, and we're going to look now at creating a Azure Firewall. And I have a couple already created. It takes about 15 minutes or so, sometimes less, for a firewall to be created. Let's create a third firewall here. Important thing around firewalls is if you are doing any testing with firewalls, to make sure that you turn down and remove the firewall after you're finished with your testing, or you could incur some large costs in the Azure environment. Azure firewalls, because they are a high availability type architecture and have that resiliency and scalability built in, is a substantial charge to them. But when you're running an enterprise production environment and need a firewall, it's a great resource to put into play. So I have a specific resource group for these firewalls that I'm creating already ready to go, and we're going to create our firewall. We'll create firewall 3. I'm going to put it into West US 2. I'm not going to do any availability zones, but again, we can put this across our three availability zones within our region if we wanted to. We're going to name it give it a virtual network name. We're going to give it an IP address, and I'm just making sure that these are not overlapping with my other IP addresses. And here we can create our new public IP. If we wanted to force tunneling, we can do that here as well. Force it to a specific public IP address. This would work in a hybrid environment where traffic coming into our Azure environment is going to now be forced into our on-premise environment rather than our Azure environment. We can redirect that traffic. We're not going to do that in this case, and we're just going to review and create our firewall. So if we go back to firewalls and look at one that we already have created, we can see here, we have our overview, we have our access controls. We can create role-based access controls in here. We can enable DNS to our firewall if we want to. We have our public IP configuration. We have firewall manager, so all of our firewalls can be managed through one management interface. Here's our threat intelligence. So we can have here with, set alert and deny for anything. We can create alerts. We can turn off threat intelligence, which is not recommended, and manage those again through the Azure Firewall Manager. And here, when we look at our rules, we have the ability to create various rules within here: network rules, application rules, NAT rules, how we're going to translate addressing. And if we want to create, say, a network rule, you can see that we have the ability now for creating those rules in our environment. So if we want to create a network rule here, and we create a priority just like we did for an NSG, we're going to allow traffic. Let's make this allow HTTPS. We're going to set our protocols. Source type IP. We'll make this an any IP address. Again, IP address. Let's do an any on this one. And our destination ports, we're going to use 443 for that. And so very easily we are creating a rule for allowing HTTPS traffic with a priority of 1000. And then we could actually create another rule to block port 8080 traffic for HTTP, and then only allow encrypted traffic into our environment. So we're updating our firewall now. If we go back into the dashboard, the other thing I wanted to show everybody is the ability for other third-party firewalls to be created within the Azure environment. And you can see that very easily with the within the marketplace. If we go to marketplace and we simply type in firewall, and we have a number of firewalls that then come up. And you can see here, one that doesn't come up is a Palo Alto, which is surprising. But if we just went in and did Palo Alto, or just Palo, in a moment, our Palo Alto networks will come up. So you can see here, VM series, next generation firewall. We can go in here and select a plan. You have a pay-as-you-go plan, or you have an ELA type plan. And you can bundle 2 firewalls in here. You can bundle 1 firewall and click create. And it's going to stand up a virtual machine once we create it. I'm going to put in my resource group here so I can close that out. Contains, oh, okay, we need a standalone resource group for our Palo Alto. It needs to stand up on its own. I have some resources in the East US, so I'm going to do that. Here we would create our username and password. If I go back to networking, I have to set up these areas here. Here we got our firewall VNet. It's creating new for all these. And you can see it's actually, if you recall, I did a 10.4 IP address for my last firewall. I have, through the creation of other firewalls and other VNets within the environment, have gone through 10.0 to 10.4. So this is actually creating 10.5 IP schema for this firewall, therefore maintaining my non-overlapping environment. And then we have to create our VM series here for this. And again, we're going to have to have our DNS name for this firewall. We're going to create a VM. Create the latest version, and you can see here it has a recommended virtual machine size. And then we review and create. It does our final validation. Now, after I've done my validation, unfortunately, my validation has failed because my subscription for the Azure environment, my developer subscription, does not allow marketplace purchases. It only allows me to utilize the Azure resources. But if I had a standard pay-as-you-go subscription, it would then validate this, and I could create a virtual machine already loaded with the Palo Alto software on it to be able to go in and manage that environment. So very easy to utilize and create a standard firewall that works with your corporate standards for many of the industry recognized firewall suppliers within the network ecosystem. So hopefully you now know a little bit more about how you would create a firewall within the Azure environment, whether it's an Azure firewall or if you have a corporate standard for another third-party firewall that you want to run on a virtual appliance within your environment. You now understand that that is a capability. If you're working and watching this video to learn more about network resources for exam purposes, you really only need to concern yourself with the capabilities of an Azure firewall. They're not going to ask you about any third-party firewall services. But as I talk about the entire ecosystem and how you're going to architect your network around the Azure environment, talking about those third-party firewall virtual appliances is very important to understand. But for most situations, in most cases, the Azure firewall is a great resource to utilize within the Azure environment. Like I said, it's already built with resiliency and scalability. The Azure firewall does have capabilities and interoperabilities for connecting to other firewalls that are in your on-premises network to allow that inter-office and site-to-site hybrid connectivity within your Azure environment. So you can do a lot with that Azure firewall without having to stand up a virtual appliance, unless you are very stringent about having your enterprise corporate standard being utilized for your firewall. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this video, and feel free to follow me on the social media links provided. and I look forward to the next video that I'll be providing you in the series.